Mandy gazed at the well-dressed man standing before her, his words reverberating in her mind. "Amanda Black, you've been served," he stated, his voice betraying a hint of sadness. The office fell silent, and for a moment, Mandy felt as if time had ceased its flow. In her hand, she held the death sentence of a 5-year marriage. She had been married for a year to a taciturn individual. She collapsed into her chair, clutching the papers, and slowly regained her composure. The office gradually returned to normal, and the stares, whispers, and disapproving looks that had previously been directed at her began to subside. Mandy then heard her friend's soft voice nearby. "Mandy came on," Kit said softly, taking her friend's hand and helping her to her feet. "Let's get you to the conference room, away from that spotlight." The black-haired 30-year-old woman led her friend away from the gawking co-workers. Those who observed the proceedings noted a striking transformation in Mandy's demeanor. She went from a boisterous, flirtatious, and fun-loving blonde to a battered woman in a matter of minutes. Some interpreted this shift as a form of irony or humor, while others perceived it as a manifestation of pity. Many were already aware of the underlying cause for the divorce. Mandy stammered, things were just starting to turn for the better. She embraced herself as if the gesture would provide solace. The strength Kit placed her arms around her friend in an attempt to console her. "I am unsure," Kit replied softly. "Did Eric provide any indication that this outcome was imminent? Did he offer any hints that this would transpire in a different manner?" She was panting, as though they were newlyweds. "I surmised that he was attempting to make up for lost time abroad." Kit only flinched slightly, but Mandy noticed it. Mandy began to mentally review the previous 4 months of her marriage. Upon returning from Afghanistan, Eric's sexual performance had markedly improved. It was even more enthusiastic than during his previous deployment in Iraq 2.5 years prior. He exhibited a notable degree of passion and arousal. Mandy often found herself overwhelmed with emotion, particularly during their intimate encounters. After a particularly arousing session, she smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. The experience had been both exhilarating and sensual. Following her recent business trip, Mandy's demeanor had shifted. Her smile had taken on a subtle yet perceptible warmth. "Oh my God, Keith, Eric just wore me out. We did it so often that I finally begged him to stop." Mandy's smile disappeared as she looked at her friend's questioning face. "Nothing happened when I was on that trip. I told you it was over." She objected. Kit nodded but didn't smile. "When was the last time Eric just hugged you or just kissed and touched you? When was the last time he made love to you tenderly?" She sat in a chair, looking at Kit with a questioning expression. With a determined sigh, Kit looked at her friend before continuing, "Mandy, did he make love to you or just have sex with you?" Mandy covered her face with her hands and sobbed deeply. She wondered, why did he do it, and then suddenly froze. She was horrified, and she whispered, "Oh God, Kit." She was horrified because she realized that he knew. "God, please, no." Tears filled Kit's eyes as she embraced her weeping friend. She was acquainted with Eric, and if he truly knew, it was a dire situation. Eric acknowledged her presence with a nod of his head, listening to the conversation on his cell phone. He finally responded with a simple, "Thank you, sir," when he learned that his wife had received packages of photos and legal documents. He then proceeded to focus his attention on his laptop, initiating a process that would alter the course of events. His unfaithful wife's life would be forever altered. She would remember this incident for the rest of her life. He picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Hello, this is Human Resources," came a pleasant young voice. "What can I do for you, Mr. Davis?" "Please," said Eric, his voice cold. "This is Eric Black." "Oh, Mr. Black," the girl said, quickly transferring him. A few seconds later, Eric was talking to the unsmiling man. The conversation was short. Neither party raised their voice. While neither party resorted to raised voices, the atmosphere remained palpably hostile. As Eric concluded the call, he took a deep breath and glanced at his phone, noting that his wife had already called him 5 times. He attempted to calm himself, reminding himself that she had not yet reached out. A sharp knock on the conference room door interrupted his thoughts. When Kit opened it, she immediately recognized the 3 men standing before her. The first was the individual in question was a mature-looking man named Simon Samuels, who occupied the position of vice president and head of the branch. He was accompanied by a person of considerable stature named John Davis, who held the role of head of human resources. Kit was compelled to observe that Mr. Davis's complexion was markedly red, and she was under the impression that she could discern the heat radiating from his face. The individuals standing behind them were Anna Prescott, the office manager, and Mandy and Kit's superior, Miss Garnett. The request was made for Kit to be spoken with. Mr. Samuel made this request in a severe tone of voice. Kit was thanked for her assistance, but she was instructed to return to her desk. The three individuals proceeded into the room, and Kit was asked to leave. After meticulously concealing the door behind her, Miss Black interjected, "We seem to be facing a significant challenge." Mandy proceeded to exit the premises with haste, attempting to avoid any missteps. She held the bulky paper envelope, which Mr. Davis had entrusted to her, with a firm grasp. Inside, she discovered a series of disturbing images depicting her and Sean Thompson, the business manager from the third floor. Mr. Davis then provided a brief account of his discussion with Eric. Eric had threatened to publicize the fact that the company had failed to adhere to the established code of conduct. He informed Mr. Davis that he would discuss this matter with his soon-to-be ex-wife. Before deciding whether to take any legal action, Mr. Davis informed her that they would meet with Sean the following time. He advised her to go home and speak with her husband before the situation escalated further. Additionally, he informed her that they would convene with her and discuss her future at the company the following day, following her meeting with her husband. Mandy encountered difficulty locating her vehicle due to her emotional state. The bright sunlight made it challenging for her to identify her car. The glare of the headlights reflected off the cars, making them somewhat difficult to identify. However, her vehicle was not so challenging to locate. Mandy climbed into the vehicle, recalling the arguments that had prompted Eric to finally consent to rent a car for her. He had acquiesced just before departing for Afghanistan. She wiped her eyes, donned her dark glasses, and proceeded on her way home. A man in an HGV sedan parked nearby pressed a button on his phone rang. "Thanks, Bob," Eric said calmly. No, that's it. Please tell Ron that you guys did a great job and deserve the award." "Thanks again." "Goodbye." Eric sighed again. He had one more call to make. If he made it, there would be no turning back. But why would he even want to go back? All that was left was an unfaithful wife who had ripped his heart out and a broken marriage that he could never put back together again. Eric shook his head. He then proceeded to retrieve his cellular telephone and promptly initiated a call. After the second ring, a soft click was heard, followed by an abrupt cessation of sound. Eric remained stoic, his gaze fixed upon the video stream displayed on his laptop. After a few minutes, a tear rolled down his cheek. Mandy maneuvered the large SUV onto the highway and let out a sigh. She hoped to circumvent the congested traffic typical of rush hour. She struck her fist against the steering wheel, noting that her usual 30-minute commute would take significantly longer at this speed. A mere 60-minute drive would now take over an hour. She reflected on her marriage, considering the unlikelihood of salvaging it. Eric had discovered her infidelity prior to his deployment to Iraq. While he might have forgiven her, it was unlikely he would do so now. The photographs had been taken while he was stationed in Afghanistan. She wept, recognizing the depth of his disillusionment. Despite the slim probability of success, she felt compelled to attempt to salvage the marriage. She loved him, albeit in a peculiar manner. She had been unfaithful to him on more than one occasion, yet both instances occurred when he was deployed overseas to serve his country. She quickly shook her head, attempting to dispel the feelings of guilt and shame that accompanied this realization. However, the tears continued to flow. Trust was not a virtue that came easily to Eric. His childhood had been marked by adversity. His father had abandoned him and his mother at a young age, and his Mandy's mother was an alcoholic. Over the course of their 5-year marriage, Mandy had only seen her mother twice, once at their wedding and once when their son was born. It took Mandy years to trust Eric when they met in college. Mandy was aware that Eric was a soldier, but she thought she had accepted this fact. At the time, Eric had already served 2 years and was on his way to getting an engineering degree. They dated for a year before Eric proposed. Mandy could still hear her father's reaction. He said, "This has nothing to do with Eric." He then added, "I think he'll make a great husband. It's more about you. I don't think you'd make a good military wife." He then advised her not to get angry, but he also warned her that it would be difficult to be a good husband or wife when her spouse was away for a year. Mike Alex was Mandy's father. He had been in the Navy for 4 years when Mandy was a young girl. She recalled the frequent disagreements between her parents during that period. She was aware that her mother and father had experienced significant challenges and that her father did not want that for his daughter. Mandy expressed her agreement with her father's assessment. They had purchased a comfortable starter home and Eric had secured a promising engineering position. Life appeared to be on an upward trajectory until the unexpected death of her uncle. Sam called when Eric discovered his new assignment. She reprimanded him severely for leaving her. Additionally, when Eric departed for Iraq, she was already 4 months pregnant. Mandy wiped her eyes as she proceeded through the flow of traffic. She recalled the loneliness she experienced as she continued without Eric. She was confident that her parents had done everything they could to assist her, but the sleepless nights alone were a significant challenge. The prolonged absence of Eric had a profound impact on Mandy, who found herself craving his physical and emotional presence. She yearned for the comforting words he could offer, the reassurance that everything would be okay. Despite recognizing her own selfishness, she could not deny the intensity of her loneliness. In the preceding month, Mandy's mother had relocated, a decision that had provided some measure of solace. Mandy and her mother, Lisa, shared a close bond, and Lisa's proximity offered a sense of emotional support. In most respects, their personalities were so similar that they seemed more like close friends than mother and daughter. However, there were certain topics that her mother was reluctant to discuss, including the details of her marriage and her husband's military service. When Mandy attempted to broach this subject, her mother would become visibly upset. Eric returned home the day after Randy was born, leading Mandy to believe that they had become a genuine family unit. However, this proved to be a short-lived illusion. He departed after a mere 10 days, leaving her once again to face the challenges of life alone. Her mother, keenly aware of the potential consequences of her actions, implored her not to yield to temptation. She persistently emphasized the potential damage that a single indiscretion could inflict upon the lives of numerous individuals. While she refrained from delving into specifics, Mandy sensed that her father might have been engaging in an extramarital affair. Despite their amiable and cordial interactions, there was a distinct lack of passion between them. Their relationship seemed to be more akin to that of two friends residing in the same household. Mandy recalled how she had grappled with depression and loneliness in the months following childbirth. Initially, returning to work provided a sense of purpose. However, she was subsequently assigned to a project with Sean Thompson, who bore a striking resemblance to a neighborhood boy. Sean possessed the rugged, handsome features of a male model. His soft baritone voice and handsome smile elicited a visceral response in Mandy, prompting her to observe that he exuded confidence and made a striking impression. Despite this, she was aware that he was married. To an attractive and affluent woman from New York, she and her children had relocated to the area just a couple of years ago. She had even encountered his wife at a social gathering. She was physically attractive and her personality was well suited for a role in one of those reality shows featuring housewives. However, this only served to heighten Sean's allure. Just a month after they began working together, she yielded to temptation and initiated contact. She wrinkled her nose, indicating that she was the one who initiated the flirtation. The day's business trip with the project team provided an opportunity to transform the flirtation into a full-fledged romantic relationship. The relationship ultimately ended in disappointment. Despite a few more encounters, she ended it just before Eric's return. Upon his return, Eric seemed to have lost his carefree demeanor. She was aware that his trip had been challenging and that he had lost close friends. She even recalled his phone call the day after the incident. The Hummer in front of him had hit an improvised explosive device. The incident resulted in the deaths of 3 of his friends and the injury of another. Eric was profoundly affected. Mandy recalled allowing him to express his grief on the telephone, as she was unsure how to console him. She even became emotional when she informed him of her love and longing for him. This was partly due to her genuine feelings, but also because she had only recently ended her relationship with Sean, which had lasted only a few months. She held Eric in her arms. Her arms were attempting to facilitate his return to his previous state of being. She was certain that she loved him, and her affair with Sean was merely a period of weakness. When everything appeared to be going well once more, orders were issued for his deployment to Afghanistan. She was devastated. It was not unexpected that, 2 months after his departure, she found herself back in Sean's arms. She was aware that there was no justification, but ultimately it was the loneliness that drove her to pursue Sean again. And fear overpowered the guilt. She pursued Sean again, and it had taken all her charms to lure him away from the succubus and the marketing department he'd started hanging out with after their affair had ended. She felt her face flush with shame at what she'd done. Of course you're ashamed, but that didn't stop you, did it? Mandy reprimanded herself. She tried to hold back the tears but couldn't. Feeling the self, Mandy experienced a profound sense of loathing with each new tear. Sean had spent several weekends at her house, and he had even managed to persuade her to take on another project for a moment. However, Mandy eventually considered leaving Eric. Then, reality set in. Randy and her parents traveled to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to meet Eric when he returned for R&R. The trip there was, without a doubt, stressful. She was certain that her parents had suspected her, but they had not yet informed her. Upon seeing Eric, however, all of her concerns dissipated as he embraced her and kissed her. She recalled the reason she had initially married him. They dedicated every hour to revitalizing their marriage and strengthening their family. Mandy smiled faintly as she reminisced about the time Eric had been so passionate. He was so tender and loving that she had vowed to remain faithful to him for the remainder of her life. Then, Eric informed her that he would not be returning to the army. Instead, he planned to become a civilian. For months after his return from Afghanistan, she wept openly, aware that they would soon resume their role as a functional family unit. From Fort Bragg, she terminated all contact with Sean, much to his dismay and displeasure. She invested significant effort into preparing for Eric's return. Mandy even sought medical attention for her concerns regarding her mental health. She was diagnosed with clinical depression and began receiving counseling and medication. As time passed, she observed an improvement in her well-being. She made a commitment to herself that she would become the best wife Eric could ever hope for. She vowed to make up for her past actions and fulfill all of his needs. When he returned a few months later, she had indeed fulfilled her vows. She gave him her complete devotion, including her body, attention, and love. Despite Kit's concerns, she recognized that their relationship had changed. Eric's return had brought about a shift in dynamics. He was more cautious and did not share his heart as freely. She simply assumed that his reticence was due to the events that had transpired during his time overseas. However, she was now beginning to understand that he was already aware of her affair. This realization caused her considerable distress. Eric stared gloomily out the window, observing the light rain fall on those unfortunate individuals who had been caught. He could discern that the small outbreak he surmised that the current situation would not persist indefinitely. It was only a matter of time before the sun would shine again. Eric continued to observe the small dot on the laptop screen. It had been stationary for a while, but it was now finally moving. His wife's SUV had been stuck in traffic, but it was now moving forward. He took a deep breath. He consulted his watch and determined that it was time to make the call. The outcome of this conversation would be pivotal. This could be the final time he converses with the woman he had deeply loved for the last 6 years of his life. Mandy nearly twisted the steering wheel when her cell phone rang. A quick glance told her it was him. She uttered a brief prayer, took a deep breath, and answered. "Yes, it's me," he replied. "Please, let me try to explain. You know how sorry I am, honey." Eric, there was only silence. "Honey, are you still there?" "Yes." "Honey, where are you?" "Are you at home with Randy?" "I don't have a home, honey," he replied, his voice conveying the pain he was in. "You took care of that. Where are you?" "It doesn't matter. I'm just waiting for me." Despite the pain in his voice, she sensed hope. Mandy's voice was hoarse with emotion as she spoke. She had never heard such pain and anger in Eric's voice before, nor had she ever heard such pain and anger in hers. "Eric, please. I have so much to say. I made a terrible mistake. I know I made a mistake, but I need to talk to you. There is so much I need to tell you. I love you, baby. I love you, just you. Mandy was met with silence at the other end of the line. She was urged to speak her mind, but she doubted it would have any impact. She had engaged in sexual intercourse with other men on numerous occasions while he was away. She was implored to consider the implications of her actions and the potential consequences of her words. She pleaded with him to remain with her, to not abandon her until she could see him, and to not leave her alone. "Leave us," he hissed, "as you did to us." "No," she screamed into the phone. "I know what I did, but I never gave up on us. I was lonely and scared. I know that's no excuse, but that's the way it was. I love you and I believe in us, honey. I really want to put things back together." "Are you serious?" he asked, in surprise. Eric hesitated, wondering if she really believed what she was saying. She asserted that he had not abandoned them. However, his repeated use of violence against her was evidence to the contrary. She was unable to comprehend how he could have believed otherwise. She was overwhelmed with emotion and attempted to flee the scene of the incident. If only she could confront him, he would see the remorse she felt. He then experienced a sense of possibility, a glimmer of hope. He continued, his tone bitter, "I finally obtained proof that my wife had been unfaithful to me while I was stationed in Afghanistan. I suppose we were both fortunate. I believe I could have killed you and that asshole if I had discovered the truth while I was in the United States." After a few seconds, he exhaled deeply. "Amanda, this will be our final conversation if we are disconnected or if one of us hangs up. If we are put on standby, there will not be another conversation." "Eric, please," she pleaded. "We can go to a counselor. We can handle this. There are a few things you need to know before you go home. First of all, I cleaned out all our accounts and maxed out all our credit cards. I believe you have been cheating on me for the last 3 years, so I am returning." He ignored her sigh. She could keep the house, as she was fairly certain she could still detect the odor of another person in their bed. She had packed everything, but it ended up only fitting in one suitcase, so the rest was hers to keep. She could keep her SUV, though she was unsure how she would pay for it, as she suspected she would be laid off the next day. She had sent these pictures to all of his co-workers. "I have also disseminated the information to our respective families, friends, and even our church. In addition, I have shared a plethora of videos on various websites, accompanied by all the relevant data. It is likely that you will become a highly sought-after figure in the near future." "Eric," Mandy sobbed. "Why did you not wait until we spoke?" "I waited," Mandy said, her voice laden with emotion. "I waited 4 months after I returned, but you did not say anything. You would not have said anything. If you hadn't been caught, would you have done anything differently, baby?" What could she have said? He was right. "As for your little boy," Eric grinned. "I almost paid him a little visit, but after a few meetings with his wife, I don't think it would be necessary. You might want to give Sean a little warning. He'd better run. It seems his wife's family has some interesting connections to some very. I would be astonished if Sean survived the year without an accident. It is likely that his wife will seek retribution for his indiscretions. Indeed, that would include you, Eric. I am willing to make amends." Mandy's mobile phone emitted a sound. She observed that the caller was Eric. It was Mrs. Johnson from the neighboring property. "I warned you that if you disconnected, we would both be in serious trouble." His tone was threatening. Mandy, taken aback, responded in a subdued voice, "Oh, okay. I was just concerned that something might have happened to Randy." "Randy's fine," Eric replied in a gentler tone. "He's with me now, and is sleeping soundly." Mandy exhaled a sigh of relief. She then inquired about Sean's wife, Victoria. "When you and Victoria went on your business trip last week, I was interrupted," Eric said quietly. The neighbor called, identifying herself as Mrs. Watson. Mandy inquired as to the well-being of Randy and Eric. Eric responded in a tone that Mandy perceived as somewhat sinister. Mandy became increasingly distressed as Eric proceeded to discuss Victoria Thompson, whom he described as quite something. Mandy was enraged to learn that Eric had spent 2 days getting to know his wife up close. Mandy's pain at her husband's betrayal was evident in her tears. He then proceeded to make a statement that was both unflattering and untrue. He claimed that she was a superior sexual partner, but the reality was that he was the more skilled lover. Mandy's constant demands and complaints about various aspects of their relationship left little time for pleasure. Sean would likely agree with this assessment. Mandy was therefore awarded the Best Sex Award. Eric was urged to stop making such statements. She implored him to cease and began to sob once more. She struck her small fists against the steering wheel, shouting curses at the surrounding cars as they crawled forward. Her composure gradually returned and she wiped away tears of frustration. "Okay, Eric," she said, her voice still quavering. "You have won. You have exacted your revenge. You have broken me." She was silent, waiting for his response. Instead, she heard only silence. "I still love you, Eric," she said quietly. "There is no justification for my actions. I am aware of this, but I am merely requesting an opportunity to make amends. I implore you to allow me to explain my actions. There are medical issues that you should be aware of if you ever loved me. Please meet with me. Please, baby." Medical reasons including postpartum depression, clinical depression, and bipolar disorder. "Mandy, you engaged in sexual intercourse with another individual. How did I become aware of this? I hired men to follow you. They were highly effective, tapping phones and installing cameras throughout our residence, even in our bedroom. Eric, do you truly hate me? Such actions indicate a lack of affection and care. Prior to viewing the video of Mandy and Randy in bed, there was a semblance of affection and care. However, after seeing the video, it is evident that this is no longer the case. Mandy's actions were not only disrespectful but also hurtful. Eric's emotional state was evident as he struggled to maintain control. It is crucial to understand that such actions have a significant impact on the emotional state of the individual experiencing them. A year has elapsed. Old son, call another man daddy. Everything I felt for you died right then as I watched you put our son to bed with both of you. You are a monster, Eric's voice trembled. I guess I was lucky I didn't know that until we were at Fort Bragg. When I saw it, I was shocked. I almost got lost there. I was in a place where you can't afford to get lost. Eric looked at his laptop and saw that Mandy was almost home. His expression, which could be described as cruel, contorted his handsome face as he continued in a cold tone. For hurting you, Amanda, he said, I haven't even started yet. I still have a few more. He heard Mandy gasp. Oh my God, she whispered. He finished, Amanda, the house and everything left in it belongs to you. Mandy watched in horror as flames engulfed what had once been their home. Mandy was still unable to process the situation. Eric, what have you done? She asked, her voice laden with disbelief. That's a rhetorical question, isn't it? Eric replied, his tone laced with a hint of smugness. I was trained to build under combat conditions. Mandy, doesn't that make sense? I might know a thing or two about destruction, too. Where's Randy? Mandy demanded, her voice rising in agitation. He's right here, Eric replied, his tone laced with mockery. Our son is sitting 3 feet away from me, sleeping in his car seat. So tell me. Can you read the message I left in our front yard? What she mumbled, he then proceeded to distribute copies of the message throughout the neighborhood. After a brief interlude during which he listened to his wife's sobs, Eric said, Mandy, you may want to consider the implications of your actions. I suggest you contemplate where you will sleep tonight and in the near future. You could, for example, sleep in your SUV until it is repossessed, or perhaps not. I doubt Sean will be able to assist you. I am sure Victoria will have already informed him of your situation. That leaves your parents as a potential option. I wonder. One might inquire as to how your father would feel about having 2 individuals residing under his roof. Mandy sobbed through her tears. Mandy, are you truly as unintelligent as it seems? You have previously informed me that your father was unfaithful to your mother when he was serving in the Navy. Did he suspect his daughter was cheating on her husband, just as her mother had done, but unlike his own wife? Eric continued, I cannot live with a wife for the rest of my life. Perhaps he stayed for you, or perhaps he still loved her. I do not know. It is his decision. Mine is to start over and hopefully find a woman I can spend the rest of my life with. I am sure I will find someone who can love me. Be faithful and be a good mother to Randy. Please, Eric. Mandy sobbed. I can be that kind of wife. Just give me one more chance to show you. I'm already a good mother to Randy. I'm the only mother he needs. That's what the court has to decide, isn't it? He said calmly, of course, the fact that I burned down our house and effectively bankrupted us probably won't go in my favor. I saw a young man in a t-shirt. The man exited the vehicle and paused at the curb, regarding the approaching figure. Eric illuminated the area with his vehicle's headlights, prompting the man to proceed in his direction. There are a few additional details you should be aware of, and the time is limited, Eric stated, glancing at his watch. Firstly, it is crucial to convey to your superiors that my previous threats should not be cause for undue concern. Victoria is filing a similar lawsuit and will probably prevail. The court will likely view her and all the evidence I provided to her in a favorable light. As for me, Eric coughed. I do not anticipate a favorable outcome in court, so I accepted an offer for a position in another country. I believe Randy and I would enjoy it. Mandy yelled into the phone, you can't take my baby. In fact, he is my son, and I can. Please, Eric, she said. Amanda pleaded, he's my son too. Eric replied calmly, in a few years, he won't even remember you. Don't worry, he continued. I'll send you pictures of him at Christmas. We even call on Mother's Day and his birthday. Since we won't know where you'll be, he added, we'll just call your parents. Mandy wept bitterly, realizing the hopelessness of her situation. Eric sat for a while, concerned and somewhat he was disconcerted by his own actions and realized that he would not be sending her pictures or calling her. He was aware that the thought of her waiting desperately for calls that would never come and reliving that revenge for years to come would be more cruel than he had previously thought. He said goodbye, his voice cold and detached, and he hoped that she would suffer eternal damnation. As he listened to her hysterical screams begging for a son, Captain Black terminated the call. He then inquired of the man in the tank top, who was standing in front of him, whether he still wished to be known as Eric Black. The man, who was smiling weakly, replied that he was simply Eric Black, at least for the time being. The captain then handed him an envelope containing the numbers and passwords to the offshore bank accounts into which his funds had been transferred, minus some fees. Here are the relevant details. The young man then proceeded to present the captain with the aforementioned documents, which included passports, photo IDs, and plane tickets for Marcus Gray and his son, Michael Gray. The teenager's demeanor shifted to one of cheerful confidence as he presented the items. In response, Eric Black's expression became noticeably more enthusiastic. He proceeded to place his old IDs and 2 SIM cards from his cell phones into a small metal bucket. As he did so, he displayed a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk. He then produced a lighter and proceeded to melt the items into a small puddle of blackened plastic. He then took a small hammer and, with a swift and decisive motion, shattered both phones. The remnants were then tossed into the bucket. He then proceeded to dispose of the bucket in the nearest trash can. His satisfaction with the outcome was evident. Eric then proceeded to retrieve his vehicle keys and handed them to the young man, saying, "Tell Bob and Ron thank you for the rental." The young man, with a broad smile on his face, replied, "I apologize. I must have made a mistake." In the subsequent minutes, Eric proceeded to check in at the airport, his demeanor visibly jubilant. He was anticipating the forthcoming weeks, during which he and his son would spend time on a secluded beach with a lieutenant he had met. His contract was not scheduled to commence until the following month. In Afghanistan, they had only been friends. Now that he had obtained evidence of his wife's infidelity, however, Eric was eager to ascertain whether there were additional details he was unaware of. Mr. Gray, the individual at the front desk, offered his polite greeting, "Have a wonderful flight." Thereafter, Mr. Gray and his son Marcus Gray proceeded through the lobby, embarking on a new phase of their lives.